Hey everyone, welcome back to my channel and another video in honor of National Family History Month. If you didn't see last week's video, I will link to it in the description below, as well as last week's blog post. Plus, you will also find this week's blog post down there as well. And while you are over my blog, definitely check out some of the other family history content that I have posted over the years. Today, I'm actually rehashing a video that I made last year, and that is talking about how I use Trove to find my ancestors. That video still gets views to this day. It got so many more views and comments and likes and stuff like that than I thought it would, and it turned out that it was a really helpful little resource for people. So Trove recently revamped their entire website, gave it a fresh face, and even though everything is kind of pretty much in the same place, I feel like if someone is watching my video last year and are trying to apply the tips and tricks that I shared in that video to the new layout of Trove, it could be a little bit difficult, a little bit overwhelming, trying to translate the two different versions of the website. So I thought I would just make this video again. If you did see last year's video and you have been using Trove somewhat religiously since then, you don't need to watch this one. If you haven't seen last year's video, well, that's what this one here is here for. So essentially what I'm going to be sharing with you is just how to best utilize the keyword and advanced search on Trove in order to refine your results to find the people that you're looking for in your family tree, rather than trawling through hundreds upon thousands of articles that are not related to you at all. We all know that family history research is never complete and our time is super valuable, so we don't want to be trawling through records that clearly do not relate to us in the slightest. So even though most of these tips, tricks and ideas that I'm sharing with you guys aren't revolutionary, I know that some people tend to overlook certain methods of searching, particularly if they are new to using that particular website. So for in this case, it's Trove. If you aren't familiar with it, you can kind of not realize that these are methods that you could use to search in order to help you, in order to seriously help you narrow your results down. So let's dive into my screen capture footage. So this is what Trove now looks like. And every time you visit the website, it'll come up with this cultural advice bit where you can find out more information. So this is what it looks like. I'll actually insert a little bit of footage from last year's video so you can actually see what the difference is, what they've changed, particularly if you haven't used Trove before. And honestly, I do use Trove quite frequently, but I'd totally forgotten what the old version looked like because now I'm using this new one. So definitely have a bit of a peruse around the website just to see what little interesting bits of information here. In particular, you know, have a look at the this Trove Spotlight and explore the information and the throwbacks that they are sharing. So we're going to dive straight into searching at this awesome looking search bar at the top of the page here. Now you can totally decide to refine straight away the categories you want to search, but I always find it's quite interesting to see what information does pop up in all of the other categories. So the first tip that I'm going to give you, and this is one that you should be using every time you search on Trove, and a lot of the time on other websites as well, but obviously we're just focusing on Trove today, and that is using quotation marks around the name you are searching. This will ensure that you are getting articles where the name, for example, John Smith, appears as a name rather than John in one part of the article and Smith in another part of the article, clearly not talking about a John Smith. So we are going to be searching today for Patrick Gleason. He is my third great uncle, and he has quite an interesting story, which is one of the reasons why I have chosen him to share with you guys today. Actually, I've already told his story on my blog, which I'll link to that post below in case you're interested, but I will be delving into it a little bit in this video. So let's go search. So obviously I searched all of the categories and we have got quite a few results to go through. There's 3,202 newspaper and gazette results, only 9 magazines and newsletters, 10 images, maps and artifacts. There's only 1 research and report, 20 books and libraries, no diaries, letters or archives, 11 music, audio and videos, 1 people and organizations results, nothing in the initial search for websites, and he appears on 10 lists. But as I said, we are focusing only on the newspapers. So there is 3,202 results here, and that's way too many. Seriously, way too many results. If you want to sit there and troll through all 3,000 results, go for it. I am not going to tell you what you can and can't do, but let's be realistic. That is a lot of results to go through, most of which aren't going to be relating to who you're searching for, and you're really just wasting your own time. So let's just have a quick little scroll before we actually get into the refining of everything, I can already see at a very quick glance that most of these aren't actually who I'm looking for. And actually, in fact, the only article that straight up is about someone related to me is this obituary here from the Benalla Standard in 1914. This is obviously the obituary for Mr. Patrick Gleeson. Fun fact, this isn't actually the Patrick Gleeson we are looking for. This is actually his father. So even though it's the third article down, that's amazing. Great success so far. Once I keep scrolling, I already see that these aren't related to me at all. So we're going to utilize this advanced search over here in order to cut down on some of the articles here and hopefully refine it so I can find my Patrick Gleeson. In this search box at the top, leave the name that you've searched in quotation marks and come down here to the date range. This is the first thing that you're going to want to refine. What I like to do is search between their birth and death date, or if they are someone who has emigrated to Australia, do it from the year that they arrived here, because it's obviously pointless to be searching newspapers for when they're not even in the country. So Patrick here was born on the 14th of July, 1891. I'm just going to cheat and go the beginning of the year. And he died on the 14th of March, 1954. I like to extend the to date to a couple of years after their death in order to hit any legal notices, in memoriams and things like that. Now, you could totally keep refining in this initial search. You can refine between newspaper and gazette. I recommend just leaving it as is. There's not as many gazettes as there are newspapers, so it's always interesting to just see a gazette article pop up every now and then. You can also refine titles and places, which we will do, but I find it is so much easier to refine everything after you've done your initial search, rather than scrolling through all of these and trying to select it that way. You can obviously also do it by article category. I would just leave that. Illustration type, again, I would just leave that, and word count, again, leave that. Really, this first initial refinement is just the date range, because that's going to knock heaps out. So we've had 3,202 articles, and just by putting the dates in, we knock it all the way back to 2,215, which is still a lot. So we're going to refine it more. So as I said, we're going to refine by place. So Patrick here grew up in northeastern Victoria around Benalla and Yarrawonga, in that area. He then spent some time as an adult north of the river around Albury, Bulgandra, and then later in life returned to Yarrawonga. So we are looking for newspapers along the border. I would usually refine by place first and select a state, but because he lived along the border and so is appearing in border newspapers on both sides of the river, it's just a little bit annoying and frustrating. Instead, I'm going to go down here to title. Now, as I said, you could have done this in advanced search, but I find it's a lot easier and a little less overwhelming once you've already done that initial search, because you're only getting newspapers pop up where the name Patrick Gleeson has appeared. So you are scrolling through less newspapers. This is when it is super important to know where your ancestor lived, if that location had a local newspaper, and also which newspapers were in that general area. I feel like if you are searching for your city ancestors, it's going to be pretty easy. You just search all of the newspapers in Melbourne, all of the newspapers in Sydney, etc. Regional newspapers is a little different, because firstly, not all regional newspapers have been digitized. So just because the town that your ancestor grew up in had a newspaper doesn't mean you're going to be able to find it online, which means you were going to have to know which newspapers were within like a 200-kilometre radius kind of. And a lot of regional news was reported in a lot of newspapers across a district. So it's not just about, so for example, for me, it's not just about going straight to the Benalla newspapers and just sticking with Benalla because that's where he grew up. It's about hitting all of the northeastern Victorian newspapers in that general vicinity, a little bit further afield, and then all of the southern New South Wales in that general vicinity. Pro tip here is just to have a map on hand, even if it's just Google Maps, just so you can sort of get a gauge as to what towns are nearby and everything. So I'm just going to go through and find the first newspaper that is in the general area, which here is the Albury Banner and Wodonga Express. I like to open these in a new tab just to keep better track of which newspapers I've searched and which ones I still have to go through. So as you can see already, we are down to 20 results. That is super easy, super manageable, and I can go through every single one of them with no worry. Tip number 2 is make sure you sort by earliest first. This will give you the articles in chronological order and you can figure out a timeline pretty easily. Depending on who your ancestor was and what they got up to and what sort of news was reported, you will find that you'll be able to figure out whether an article is about your ancestor by the little preview right here. So this is from August 1891. Patrick was literally 4 weeks old. This is not going to be about him going out shooting. I don't even have to look at that article. Same with down here. Like these first few articles, Patrick is too young during this time in order to appear in the local land board news. His middle name wasn't even a J, so I can already knock that out. So further down here, we're sort of getting, so 1910, we're getting a little bit more into like, oh, this could be about him, but I can also already see that he wasn't the licensee of the Old Lamb Inn. So I already know that from earlier research. Maybe early on, I might not have known whether he was a licensee of this hotel, so I would have to go in and check the article. But because I do know, I don't have to look at it. The one that I will be looking at is the one I have already looked at, as you can tell here. So this one here from February 1919, he's in his late 20s, which means we are in prime position for when someone in the early 1900s was going to be in the news. And a little fun fact about our Patrick Gleason here, he shot a woman and she died. And so he was put on trial and sentenced to 15 years of manslaughter. One of those juicy tales from your family tree. I mean, obviously, terrible thing that happened, not condoning it at all, but from the perspective of someone researching their family tree, it's really interesting. It is better than having those ancestors who barely appeared in a newspaper and you wonder if they actually existed. So I've opened up the article. I would have a read through it to see if it was about him or if it wasn't about him. I'd use context clues about what I already know. Obviously, as I said, I already know that this is about him. So because I already know, I can be like, well, yes, this is an article for him. If you're a little bit unsure about whether an article is relating to your ancestor, because maybe you haven't researched them enough to find out specifically where they may have lived or what their occupation was and things like that, I would still recommend saving it and maybe just save it in a separate folder, being like, unsure. So that way you don't actually have to come back in the future and find the article again, because it's much easier to delete a file you've saved than having to troll through everything in order to find that article again. So what do you do when you found the article and you want to save it? Well, Trove gives you 3 different options of how you want to save. So you can save the entire issue of the newspaper. I don't really know if anyone doing family tree research would actually be wanting to save the whole issue, and in all honesty, I don't really know who would be saving a whole issue anyway, but it's a great option to have. So you'd be saving the whole issue as a PDF. You can then save the whole page as a PDF, or you can save the article either as a text document, which is this bit here, which is a little bit hit and miss sometimes depending on the quality of the article. You can save the article as a PDF, or you can save the article as an image. Now, the method that you choose to save the articles will completely depend on how you are planning to store your articles digitally and how you want to access them for future reference, and also how you want to display them physically. So you may want to play around with which option works best for you. Just because I'm going to show you one method of how I do it doesn't mean it's necessarily going to be something that you are going to want to do. If the article takes up most of the page, which I'll actually show you an example of in a little bit, I recommend saving the whole page as a PDF. If the article is like this one and pretty short, I save it just as the article. My go-to is I save it as an image file. So you are given the option of choosing from 5 different sizes. I tend to size up to the largest size and work backwards with what I like the look of. Again, this is all about playing around with what works best for you and what looks best for you. So just so you can have a bit of a gauge as to what the different sizing looks like, this is what medium looks like. It's a little bit fuzzy, and so it might not print up that well or might not save that well. When we size up, you can see that it does get a little bit clearer, and when you size up again, it's clearer again. So obviously just play around with the different sizing, and honestly, you're going to have to play around with each article for what sizing works best. So for this, I'm going to save it as the largest size. It's good quality and it'll work really well for how I save and how I display it later on. And actually, if you're interested in how I actually display all my family history, I'll link below to a flip through that I did last year, just so you can have a little peruse. So when you are saving your articles, I would normally save them to the actual folder for that person, but I obviously already have these articles, so we're not going to do that for the time being. Please do not save them as the generated name that Trove gives you. It's not helpful to anyone, is it? No, not really. What I like to do is title it the title of the article, the name, then I do the name of the newspaper. Then in brackets, I do the date of the paper. It is really important that you include the day as well as the date, because a lot of articles will refer to things that happened, it happened last Thursday. That's great, but what date was last Thursday? You're not going to know that unless you specifically know the day that the paper came out, which, can I just say, does change over the years. So if you don't know the date that the paper came out, if you don't know the date of the issue of the paper that you found this article, you're not going to know what happened that last Saturday. And then because this obviously goes over 2 images, I put a number 1 on the end. That is also really important. Make sure you order them in the right order, especially if they are running over multiples, like more than 2, if they're doing 3, 4, 5, 10, whatever. Make sure you order them properly, because it's going to be a nightmare trying to reorder them and read the article properly. Once we've done one article, we keep going on. Here's an example of an article that takes up a whole page, and why it is super important to save it as a whole page. So this is the court proceedings, that's what I'm looking for. And technically this article goes over 2 pages, but I can double check just to see how far onto that second page it goes, because Patrick's crime and his trial finishes right here, and then the next page that the article continues on is about a whole other thing which we don't care about. Just for interest's sake, just so I can show you why it's really important to save it as a whole page rather than an image. If I just did the medium size of the image, we are already over 8 pages, and honestly I would prefer it to look a little bit bigger if I was saving just as the article itself, which is only going to increase the number of pages it appears on. So super important that you save it as a page. Save it as the PDF. Depending on what your internet browser is set up as, you might be prompted to select where to save it and what to title it as. I don't have that setting on mine. I have mine as just automatically saving, so I actually would have to go into my downloads folder and then rename it. I recommend doing that straight away, because if you are downloading a lot, it's going to be confusing going in and out and trying to rename things and figure out what came from where. So another pro tip, make sure you are naming things as you go, no matter how you download it, no matter what format you download it in. So then after I've gone through all of the articles that come up in the Aubrey Banner and Wodonga Express, I would go back to my original search and my list of newspaper titles here, and I would keep going down through it. Naturally, there are going to be articles that you miss because you're not clicking on obviously every single newspaper, some of which may include articles about your ancestor, but you might not have clicked on it because you didn't realize it was a somewhat local paper. Or in the case for Patrick here, his story, because it is quite, a big thing, someone killed someone else, that story was spread far and wide. I'm naturally not going to click on those newspapers. So let's go for round 2 of how to refine. There's a couple of, it doesn't really matter which order you do this in, but I would recommend searching as many different alternatives to the person's name. So for Patrick here, his middle name was actually Lawrence. So I would search, if I could spell it, I would search Patrick Lawrence Gleason. I would actually also search both versions of Lawrence, because I do know that both versions do appear in articles, and just in general, Lawrence is a name that you can spell 2 different ways. I would also search for Patrick L. Gleason as well. Speaking of different varieties of spelling, I haven't actually seen that for this person, but Gleason can be spelt different ways as well. I would also recommend searching like their first initial, if they have a middle initial, search their middle initial as well, just to try and hit all the different variants of how newspapers have written this person's name. Also, obviously, Patrick's name is Patrick. Obviously. Patrick, a nickname for Patrick is obviously Paddy, and this Patrick was actually known by Paddy Gleason simply because his father was also Patrick, so little Paddy got known as Paddy. If you know that someone was referred to by their nickname, search for that, and for a lot of your common names, try their nicknames as well. So Richards become Dix, Edwards become Neds or Teds. Margarets become Peggies. I can't even think of any, but you know what I mean? Like Elizabeths become Beths or Lizas or Biddies. Like, you know, even if you've never seen anywhere that person was known by a nickname, search it anyway. You never know what you're going to find. I've tended to find that regional newspapers will refer to the person by their nickname because obviously it's a small, tight-knit community. You're going to know Patrick Gleason here as Paddy, whereas metropolitan newspapers are probably more so going to be their full names. When you are searching for your female ancestors, you are going to want to search for their maiden names and their married names. And just also remember that half the time they may have been referred to as their husband's name. So a lot of the time you probably will find your female ancestors in your searches for your male ancestors if they were married. So the next search I would recommend, which you can either do before or after those name variants that I've just talked about, is by also including a place of residence, whether it be the town they lived in, the locality they lived in, if they lived rurally, maybe a property name, if they owned a business, maybe the business name. Search for that person's name. Leave the location outside of the quotation marks. Obviously, I've left the date range as is. So now we have 62 articles. And generally, these are going to be 62 articles about my Patrick Gleason, and they're all going to be about the fact that he killed a woman. And this is actually a really good example of why it is important to do a bunch of different searches with different keywords and different name variants, because I wouldn't have looked at half of these newspapers. Yes, we just looked at the Albury Banner and Wodonga Express because it was a local paper, but if we go down here, we have the Braidwood Dispatch and Mining Journal, which was up New South Wales somewhere. Not going to be where I was looking. Singleton, definitely wouldn't have looked there. Mudgee, I wouldn't have looked there. So it is really important, to keep searching, to refine your search in different ways, hit different names, and hit newspaper articles that you may have missed because they weren't the titles that you would have looked at. And just because obviously I'm looking at someone who appears in a lot of articles for a crime they committed, do look at every single one of those articles, even if they are all the same article. You will definitely notice that some newspapers literally carbon copy the wording, the formatting of an article, which is, yes, repetitive, but it's really handy when some newspapers aren't the best quality and maybe can't be read that well. It's really helpful when another newspaper does the exact same article and it's a much better quality. But trust me when I say you're going to want to check with every single article and probably save every single article as well. So after you've refined everything, what do? Well, you go back and you search again. Not straight away. Please do not turn around and search straight away. But obviously, once you finish with one person, you move on to the next. I would recommend in like 6 to 12 months time to come back and search again for everyone, simply because Trove is continually digitizing newspapers, and so new titles and new articles will be popping up, and more likely than not there'll be at least one article that your ancestor featured in popping up. So yeah, don't think that once you've searched that's it, you've done, because there's going to be more things, particularly for those ancestors who you might not find a single article about. Don't worry, there's a good chance they'll appear in something in the future. You really just have to hold out and wait a little bit as articles and newspapers are digitized. Once you've gone through and exhausted your search for the newspapers and gazettes, do go through and check all of these other categories to see if your ancestor appears on them. I will say now, probably not going to find them on there. You may be like a super fortunate person and have someone in your family tree who does appear on one of these, but don't feel disheartened if you don't. A lot of people aren't going to find their ancestor in these categories. The one that probably they might pop up on is the images, maps, and artifacts. Maybe people and organizations. It really does depend on who your ancestor was. If they were a well-known person within the community and just within the nation kind of thing, then they'll be more likely to pop up on these ones. If you are interested, I can make another little how-to video on how I find my ancestors on old maps. That was such an exciting thing when I discovered. So if you want me to talk about that, let me know. But I think we're done with the screen capture part of this video, so we're going to return to past Victoria to wrap up this video. So I hope you guys enjoyed that video and that you found it helpful. If there was any tips and ideas that I didn't mention in that video that maybe you find super useful, definitely leave them in the comments below to help other people out. So before I go, I did mention in the video that it is super important to utilize a newspaper research log to keep track of everything that you're researching, particularly if you are re-researching those ancestors down the track when more articles are available. And I mentioned a newspaper research log, which I have. This is what it looks like. As I said, I have this available in a document bundle that you can purchase over on my website. It looks slightly different to this, but definitely if you're interested in that, plus whatever else is in that document bundle, super handy things for research and display, then definitely go check that out. It'll be linked in the description below. Hope you guys enjoyed this video. Give it a thumbs up if you did, and I will be back hopefully next week with another video. Yes, I have an idea. Whether I film the video is another thing, but I definitely have a blog post up as well. So I hope you guys enjoy, and I'll see you guys then. Bye!